In 1720, pirates weren't just hoisting the Jolly Roger, they were signing a contract. A written code spelling out everything from splitting gold to compensation for a lost eye. But here's the twist. These outlaws were pioneers of democracy. Voting captains in and out, sharing loot fairly. This was the real pirate code. This is quilled history, the stories the textbooks quietly left out. How fair was this system? Check out Bartholomew Roberts' injury schedule. Lose an eye? 100 pieces of 8. A leg? 500. A right arm? 600. That's a pirate welfare state, decades before any nation offered such benefits. It wasn't just fairness, it was a social contract that kept the crew loyal. Why trade a navy berth for a splintery pirate deck? On a naval ship, you were property. The captain's word was law, the lash answered every complaint, and your pay barely covered rum. One wrong look and you'd be flogged raw. That was a prison sentence with salt water. Now compare pirate pay. On a pirate ship, shares were equal. Captain got 1.5, quartermaster 1.25, the rest split evenly. That's a far cry from the Navy's pittance. And if you lost an arm? The articles guaranteed 600 pieces of 8. The Navy would have docked your pay for the missing limb. So, how did pirate democracy work? It started with the Articles of Agreement, a formal contract signed by every crew member before setting sail. Not a casual handshake, a binding document laying out rules of conduct, division of loot, and injury compensation. Think of it as a constitution for the high seas. But here's the real kicker. Every man had a vote in affairs of moment. As Captain Charles Johnson wrote in 1724, the crew could vote on anything from where to sail to who led them. And if the captain stepped out of line? Vote him out, just like that. A democratic system on the high seas, decades before most nations on land. Why did nobody stop it? Because the crew held the real power. The captain served at the crew's pleasure, elected by majority vote. They could vote him right back out if he got too greedy or reckless. That's a level of accountability most kings would never face. But here's the catch. The captain wasn't the only check. The quartermaster held equal power, overseeing discipline and dividing loot. So the captain commanded in battle, but the quartermaster ran daily life. 2 leaders, balanced by the crew's vote, a system of checks and balances on the high seas. 3 days after battle, one crewman with a shattered left leg was due 500 pieces of 8. And here's the kicker. That wasn't charity. It was written into the contract before he signed on. Pirates didn't just promise fair pay. They insured their own against the brutal cost of the job. How did this welfare state compare to the world? In 1720, no nation on earth offered disability pay to workers. But pirate articles set a clear price list. An eye, 100. A leg, 500. A right arm, 600. That's a safety net decades before any government dreamed of one. Why did the crew put up with the captain? Because the articles made sure his share wasn't much bigger. Bartholomew Roberts' crew spelled it out. Captain got 1 full share and a half, quartermaster 1.25. That's it. The man in charge earned barely more than deckhands, keeping everyone rowing in the same direction. But here's the kicker. That tiny bonus was a world away from the Navy's pay scale. A Navy captain could earn 20 times a sailor's wage, while a pirate captain got just 50% more. Roberts' crew even voted to retrench their own rations when supplies ran low. Equal shares weren't just fair, they were the glue that held the crew together. In 1720, while most of the world bowed to kings, pirate crews were voting their captains in and out. This wasn't a happy accident. It was a deliberate social contract engineered for survival, because a crew that trusted its leaders and shared wealth fought harder, stayed loyal, and lived longer. Compare that to the rest of the world. In 1720, no nation on earth let citizens vote out their leaders. The pirate system wasn't just ahead of its time, it was a blueprint for modern democracy, decades before the American and French revolutions. So what can we learn from a band of outlaws who voted on everything? Their code was a blueprint for fairness, where every voice mattered and leaders answered to the crew. That idea didn't stay on the seas. It echoed into the modern world, shaping how we think about consent and shared power. But before any pirate set sail, they had to put their name on the line. The Articles of Agreement weren't just a captain's whim, they were a written contract, signed by every crew member. Breaking it meant expulsion, or worse. This wasn't just a rule book, it was a binding social contract that held the entire crew accountable, from the lowest deckhand to the captain himself. So, who made sure the captain didn't turn tyrant? Enter the quartermaster, a second-in-command elected by the crew. He had the power to veto the captain's decisions, distribute loot, and settle disputes. This wasn't just a title, it was a deliberate check on power. The crew had 2 leaders, each balancing the other, ensuring no single man could rule the ship alone. But why would any sailor risk the gallows to join a pirate crew? Because the Articles promised something the Navy never did: fair treatment. The code was a recruiting tool. Word spread that on a pirate ship, you'd get a vote, a fair share, and compensation if you got hurt. That was a powerful draw for men tired of being treated like dogs by the Navy. But the Articles weren't all about pay and votes. They also laid out punishments for desertion, theft, and other crimes. Marooning on a deserted island or flogging were common sentences. This wasn't arbitrary cruelty, it was a legal system. Every pirate knew the rules before signing, and breaking them meant facing the consequences. It kept order in a world that could easily descend into chaos. So why did pirates invest so much in these rules? Because the Articles were a social contract that ensured survival. By minimizing conflict and maximizing cooperation, the code kept the crew united. A pirate ship was a floating community, and the Articles were its constitution. Without them, greed and mistrust could tear the crew apart, and on the high seas, that meant death. But here's the thing. There wasn't one universal pirate code. Each crew had its own version, tailored to their needs. Some were stricter, others more lenient, yet they all shared common principles: democracy, equal shares, and injury compensation. This wasn't a one-off experiment, it was a widespread practice across the pirate world, proving that these ideas resonated far beyond a single ship. So when you stack pirate governance against the navies of the world, the outlaws win on fairness. Navy captains ruled with absolute power, and sailors had no say. Pirates, on the other hand, elected their leaders and held them accountable. This wasn't just a difference in style, it was a fundamental shift in power. The pirate code was a radical experiment in democracy, and it worked. But these Articles weren't just a piece of paper, they were a living contract. Every pirate signed them before joining, and the terms were non-negotiable. The captain and crew were bound by the same rules. If a captain broke the Articles, the crew could vote him out. If a crewman broke them, he faced marooning or worse. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a binding agreement that kept everyone accountable. From the lowest deckhand to the captain himself, it was a legal system that worked because everyone had a stake in it. So, what does this mean for us today? The pirate code was more than just a historical curiosity, it was a working model of democratic governance. It showed that even in the most chaotic environment, rules based on consent and fairness could create order. The pirates didn't just stumble upon this, they engineered it deliberately, and their experiment proved that when people have a voice and a stake, they cooperate better. That's a lesson that still resonates in modern